Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today. This is Quilt Therapy, Quilting Tips and Tricks. Mostly this presentation is going to be about organization and inspiration. My name is Suzanne Horton and I am Head of Reference Services here at the Montgomery City County Public Library's Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Branch. And I will get started. So I have been sewing, quilting, and crafting in general since before I could remember, but I do remember at the age of 10 I got my first sewing machine, and since then, 30 years later, I have discovered that I don't know everything. No one knows everything. A lot of times I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm eager to find out and make my mistakes and learn from my mistakes. Sewers and quilters use different methods. Hand sewing, and sometimes people get a little territorial about their method. Like if you only hand sew, great. If you only use a machine, great. I don't judge anyone who uses alternative methods. Some people enjoy sewing that doesn't even involve a sewing machine, and you just use essentially double stick tape to put your seams together. But if it is a creative process for you and you enjoy it and it brings you happiness, I'm all for it. So let's get started on the presentation. These are the tips that I'm going to be sharing with everyone today. If you have been a sewer and quilter for a long time, these may be tips that you are already aware of. Some may be new. I hope that you find something useful in this list and can find some valuable tidbits from my experiences. First tip is quilters love stripping. Quilters also love puns, so you're going to find a lot of puns in here. But this is one of the first tips I got from a quilting friend of mine, and that is when you buy fabric, always cut a little extra off in strips. So I tend to keep 1.5 inches, a 2 inch, a 2.5 inch, and a 3 inch, and sometimes bigger if I have a whole lot of fabric yardage that I'm not going to be using for whatever given project. Keep your strips clearly labeled and with each other, so keep your 1.5s together and your 2.5s together, so on and so forth. Trust me, these will always come in handy. Especially keep the fabrics of your non-favorite colors. So for example, my favorite color is green or anything in the cool colors, but I'm always finding that I need some reds and I need some things that aren't usually my go-to colors. So always have those on hand in your stash. Stash being your hoarded collection of fabric. I also really suggest keeping extra strips in whatever binding size you prefer. Of course, if you're a quilter, you know what binding is. It's the bit that goes around the edge of a quilt to sort of finish it up. I think scrappy bindings look great where it's different colors along the edge. So, keep whatever binding size you use. Most people use 2.5 or 3 inch. Keep those together, and you will thank me one day. Some future project is going to need some of that fabric, and you're going to have it on hand, and it's going to come in handy. Quilters really do love puns. This Eleanor Burns book is a classic. If you don't own it, I would suggest buying it. Of course, you could check it out from a library, but there's nothing like owning your own book. Over on the right side of the screen here, you can see some binding bits that I have kept over the years. These are leftover pieces from other projects, but I keep, as long as it's 12 inches or longer, I keep it, because even if you don't choose to use it as binding, you can open it back up and get a 3 inch or a 2.5 inch, depending on what your measurement is, strip of fabric that you can use for scraps or anything like that. And here is a top that I made 100% out of scraps. And these were strips that I had accumulated over the years of batiks, because I love batiks. And so this was a super easy project to put together. Sort of a modified rail fence. Instead of using 3 strips, I used 4 strips, and I paid no attention whatsoever to the colors. And I kind of like the way that turned out. It's a bit of chaotic color. Okay, the next tip is learning to hoard. Keep your scraps, even little pieces. Get yourself probably a full-size bin. Rubbermaid bins work great for this. to keep your scraps and leftovers from projects together. You can also use quart and gallon freezer bags to keep smaller collections of scraps together that match. So you can see in the lower left-hand screen there's a Ziploc bag full of sort of orange, red, and white batiks from a project. The finished project is on the right there. But you almost always you have leftover little bits and bobs unless you are a very, very precise measurer. So keep those. You can make little projects from them, mug rugs, things like that. Keeping scraps has benefited me and many, many other quilters, especially during this time, during COVID-19, when a lot of stores are selling out of basic things, black and white thread, some smaller elastics, and basic non-printed cotton fabrics and things like that. Everybody wanted those for mass making purposes. If you have been sewing and quilting for a long time, you've probably got some in your scrap bin if you've been keeping your scraps. Even if you think you're never going to use this 2-inch square, keep it anyway. Keep it with other 2-inch squares, and then you can make a pixel project or something like that. And very few aspects of life really benefit from hoarding, but quilting and sewing and crafting really is one that does. As long as you have the space available to you, I suggest you keep things because they really will come in handy at some later point. Okay, my next tip is to keep bins. These would be for fabric collections. For example, keeping all of your green fabrics together or all your batiks together, things like that, but also for projects. The great thing about the not necessarily clear but semi-clear bins is that you can write on them and you can actually see your fabric through them. So if you've got them stacked on a shelf or even in a corner, you can quickly see, okay, that's where my 2-inch strips are, and that's where my 1.5-inch strips are, things like that. My go-to size for these is the 13-inch long, 10-inch wide, and 6-inch deep. I really prefer the ones with the lids because they do stack nicely, and you can have multiple projects going at the same time, and you don't have to worry about having them all out and having them get messed with and things like that. The next tip is order some pizza. Unused pizza boxes are fantastic for storing finished blocks or blocks in the process of being finished. The cardboard is easy to label and they're free. So the next time you order pizza, when you go to pick it up, I don't know if they would deliver unused boxes, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Just ask for some extra boxes. 12 inches or bigger would work really well. And they don't last forever, especially if you're stacking them, but it's free. And it's a useful size for keeping blocks. And potentially you get pizza out of it, so that's a win-win. This is one of my personal favorite tips. I don't even know where I came across this, probably online somewhere. No shoes needed, meaning this is a shoe rack, an over-the-door organizer for your shoes, but I am using it to store my thread and buttons and little notions and things like that according to color. This is super easy because you just tack it onto your wall and forget about it. You could even put it over your door if you don't have wall space, and you can see what you have. You got it well organized. You can see, oh no, I'm running low on purple thread or something like that. And it's really nice. It's a nice shot of color in your creative space. Another tip is to find your people. So find a community. This can be online, this can be in person, this can be a quilt guild, it could just be you and one other friend. But it's important to find your people because they will offer support and advice. A lot of places, even the smallest towns, have quilt guilds and groups if you want that sort of in-person interaction. Online, you can find Facebook groups, listservs, just online communities in general that are a really, really good source of the sort of companionship and support that you can get from other quilters and sewers. I have had crafty people in my life all of my life, and some friends come to it late. Some friends I meet and find out they're quilters, and we bond over that. This is just a chance for me to brag a little bit about some of my sewing friends. So these are some items made by friends. The one on the left is made by a local friend, and this was something she was asked last minute to put together for a charity project. And as you can see, it's really big pieces, but it came together nicely and it works. The person loved it and they were able to make money for a charity. The quilt in the middle, the really scrappy quilt, is made by my longtime friend who also does long arm quilting, and this is the first quilt in a very, very, very long time that she actually made for herself, because she had been working on other people's projects handling the long arm quilting. This was something kind of dear to her because it was the first project she did for herself in a long time. On the far right is not a quilt, but something that could clearly use up some scraps. It's a little stuffed owl that's made by a friend in Louisiana, and she does sell these at craft markets and on Etsy and things like that. So keeping the scraps can help you not even just with quilting, but in general with crafting, if you need just a little shot of color or something on an applique piece. Here's some more bragging about my awesome, talented friends. These 3 items were all made by my childhood best friend. I was 4, she was 5 when we met, and we were friends from then on. And she actually came to quilting later in life, and I've loved it because we've been able to, we never disconnected, but we can reconnect even more through quilting. And she started a Facebook group, which I have joined, and it's been a lot of fun. And it's been a lot of fun to see what she's come up with. I just love the ice cream table runner on the right side of the screen there. So the next tip is to find inspiration, even if it is just a kitchen table that you can only use on the weekends or a corner of a basement. Try and find a space and make it your own. Put your little stamp on it. Put pictures of the people you love, the things that inspire you, the colors that you love. I've got some Christmas lights up in my sewing room. Lots of pictures of friends and family, little doodads and trinkets and things like that, things that just make me happy. And I want to surround myself with that positive vibe when I'm in my sewing room, because I want it to be a creative space and a flowy, a loving space where my creativity can flow. Of course, this is your space. You want it to be your space. But you should always be willing to share. I don't have children, but when my niece was little, she would always come and try to help me. I'm using air quotes, help me. But, if you have kids or you have pets, they're going to come in and be nosy and they're going to try to get involved. So try to be understanding of that and patient with them. Clearly, my cats enjoy my sewing room, and I do not sew alone. Unfortunately, they don't know how to work a seam ripper. They do have claws, but it's not the same. I did teach my niece how to do a seam ripper, which has been very useful because when she was young and at home, I would call for her and she could rip out a seam and help me that way. So try and find things that the little ones can do, or even projects that you can do with them to get them involved in the process. You may actually be encouraging the next generation of crafters. Believe in UFOs. So UFOs, as you might know, are unfinished objects. These are projects that you start, but you don't actually finish for whatever reason. Don't give up on them. It might be the most frustrating project you've ever worked on, but don't give up. Put it in a bin, in a box somewhere, label it, and put it aside. One day, you're going to dig that out and go, oh, well, I know how to do that method now, and I'm going to go ahead and finish this. Or you might be asked to make something for someone last minute, and you've got 12 blocks done, but you never finished the other 12 that you needed done. Well, you can make a smaller project of that. So keep your UFOs, keep them labeled. If you're frustrated with it, put it aside. Don't worry about it. But, one day they may come in handy. So, again, encouraging hoarding. Orphans are similar to UFOs. Orphans are just like bits of leftovers from a project. It's like extra blocks, extra fabric that you've already cut or measured, but you end up not needing them for your project. These can be used to make small projects, wall hangings, doll quilts, baby quilts, mug rugs. You can piece them together to make a backing. I once created a backing for a king-size quilt just using UFOs and orphans, and it's the most chaotic, random thing, just random Tootsie Roll fabric. Like, it doesn't make any sense thematically, but my husband actually likes it better than the front of the quilt, which is crazy to me, but to each their own. So your orphans, your UFOs can be useful one day. You've put time into them and you've put effort into them, and there will be a benefit from them. So the next point is project orientation. You want to try to be project oriented, and by that I mean have a project and focus on it. But if that project is not going to plan, don't overburden yourself. Be able to set it aside and work on something small. I love making mug rugs, little scrappy blocks, coasters, baby doll quilts, wall hangings. Face masks are super popular right now. Even lanyards for holding your badge at work or attaching your badge at work. These are just small things that you can make where if you need like a mental break from the big project, if you're getting frustrated with it, that you can work on to sort of reinvigorate your creativity if possible. All the things you see pictured here are side projects that I've worked on throughout the years. The taggy mug rug, taggy being folded over ribbon. Taggies are great for little ones, like babies and toddlers. They chew on them, they hook their little finger in them and run off down the hall. So they're really great for little ones. This is like scraps of ribbon that I had on hand, and a cousin had a little girl, and she was still an infant, and I hadn't made her anything yet. So I came up with that to send, and you'll see a picture of her later enjoying that. The center picture is a collection of 2-inch batik squares that I had collected through the years. I called them pixels, and I had intention of making a rather large project, but if I was stuck on a project or just didn't know what to do with myself, I put those together. And I'd put a column rather of, I think it was 30 pixels at a time, and then I just added them together. And that is something that would be laborious normally, but it was something that I could do and not think about, and it was very therapeutic. Other things on here are just small projects that I've made just to give myself something to do, not necessarily using scraps, but just something small to keep me creating if I am stuck in a rut on a particular project. I really would not suggest more than 3 projects, big projects at a time. You don't want to stress yourself out. The whole point of this is to enjoy the process and not get overburdened with the stress of, oh, I've got to finish this, and oh, I've got to do that, and oh, I've got to do that. Yeah, you're going to get stressed, especially if you're trying to get something done by Christmas or birthday or a certain holiday. But the point of being creative and the point of quilting and sewing, at least for me, is therapy, and to enjoy it and to enjoy the process and to make people around you happy. So, sometimes you're having a bad day, and sometimes that bad day can follow you into your sewing or crafting room. The machine may be doing something funny, nothing is working right, or maybe the stress of the world has just followed you and you can't turn it off and you're just not feeling very creative. My suggestion is to stop. Do not force yourself to sew when you're having a bad day, because you're just going to keep making mistakes and it's going to get worse and worse, and you're just not going to enjoy yourself. So just stop and take a deep breath, watch a TV show, have a cup of tea, something, do something else, because you're just going to keep making mistakes and it's going to get worse and worse. It is perfectly fine to not sew. If you are not in the right headspace, don't force it, because it's not going to be fun. So once people know that you can sew and quilt, they're going to ask. If you are comfortable with your cousins, best friends, neighbors asking for a quilt, go ahead and make them a quilt. But you might not be. It is 100% okay to say no. I have trouble saying no to children, though. When a baby is born, or someone comes and says, can you make a quilt for my nephew or whatever, I enjoy that. They're small and they're really, really cute. And I always ask for this. This is the cute kid tax. So you have to send me a picture of the baby, or in some cases the dog, enjoying the finished product. Maybe not enjoying in the case of the upper or the lower right hand corner there. She was not feeling having her photo taken that day. She's now 13, so she's fine. And then you see my cousin's baby sort of in the lower left hand side with the taggy mug rug, and that did go in her mouth quite a bit, I was informed. She enjoyed gnawing on the taggies. I also occasionally make donation quilts for various organizations. So these are some examples of quilts that I have done. In the bottom center there, that was a wall hanging for an organization. So, you know, if you want to be generous, you want to make something, this is a really good way, especially if you know someone who can do the quilting, or you're going to do the quilting for free or a very or a discounted fee. You can donate something potentially very valuable to an organization for them to raffle off, sell off, whatever, to make some money. You can also, there are several programs going, Quilts of Valor, there's a couple other for children with cancer, where you can make quilts or even just tops and donate them. And they go to, for example, children in the hospital or veterans in nursing homes, things like that. There's all kinds of ways you can be generous with your time and your talents. It doesn't have to be a local organization. It can be a national project that is going. Sometimes they have specific dimensions and things like that, but sometimes not. Sometimes they'll just take whatever. So if you have time and you have the means, donation quilts are a great thing. You should not forget yourself, though. If you find yourself 100% of the time making things for other people, for family members, and you don't have a single quilt of your own, you need to make something for yourself. The green quilt in the middle was, I just like green and I love batiks, so I made a throw quilt for myself. It's still unquilted at this point, but I'm going to get it quilted very soon. The purple and gold on the left is a king size quilt log cabin that I made for myself and my husband, and that was a very long project. Basically on football Sundays, when he was watching whatever game, I was in my sewing room putting together blocks for this, and it was multi-years that I just made block after block after block. I was actually able to make a king-size quilt and 2 queen-size quilts from those blocks. Thankfully, I know a lot of LSU fans, so it wasn't a problem. Here in Alabama, of course, that would need to be either Auburn's colors or Alabama's colors in order to be popular. And then on the right side of the screen here are stacks of quilts that through the years I have made for myself or my husband. I don't forget myself. You have to be generous to yourself as well, because it's just important to take care of yourself. I believe they call that self-care. It is also okay to say no. So this is, again, if your cousin's neighbor's former coworker asks for a quilt, it's okay to say no. You may have a lot going on in your personal life. You have a lot of projects you're working on yourself. It's okay. It's okay to say no. It's hard. I don't like saying no. But you shouldn't agree to make things that you don't want to make. That may actually even come across in the making of them. You're not going to have much fun putting them together. It's just best if you're not interested in doing something as nicely as possible, just say no and say, I just don't have the time right now. I've got too many other things going on. It's fine. One of the last tips is that perfection is not required. Mistakes happen, and that's okay. Perfectionist quilters, the perfectionist quilters that I know, really get more stressed out than enjoy the process of putting things together. Just accept that flaws are natural, and for the most part, they can be lived with. My mom, when I first started sewing, told me if you can't see the mistake at a running gallop, it's not a mistake. Of course, you are going to notice every single seam that doesn't match, every single flaw, but most people will not. Now, even if they're a quilter, they may not notice, but another quilter might. But I really don't surround myself with people who are that judgmental. So unless it is particularly egregious, just let it be. It's perfectly fine. Now, if it bothers you to the extent that it's going to bother you, okay, go in, rip your seam, fix it, whatever you need to do. I've sewn fabric in backwards before. That's something I needed to go in and fix. But the two examples on this screen, I don't know if you can see the mistakes. If you're a quilter, you probably can. If you're not a quilter, you're probably like, I don't see anything wrong with either one of these. There are mistakes on both of these. But do I let them bother me? No, it's perfectly fine. These are just little projects that I worked on that, it's not for a quilt show. If it's for a quilt show, sure, be a perfectionist and make sure you got every stitch and seam correct, but otherwise it's fine. For the longest time, people said that it was a legend that in Amish culture, quilters would purposely put a flaw in a quilt because only God is perfect. That's been proven false, because the truth is there is no such thing as a perfect quilt. Learn to accept your imperfections and just live with it. It's fine. And really, the errors that you make you a better quilter. One thing, you're less likely to make that mistake again. Like when you sew the wrong sides of the fabric together instead of the right sides together, or you get your color rotation mixed up or something like that, you're going to pay attention and not make that mistake again. But also, when you make a mistake, figuring out how to fix it, or figuring out a workaround if you don't know how to do something and you don't have anyone to ask or anything like that, that just makes you a better quilter and a better sewer. So there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. The problem is, don't give up and don't be obsessed with the mistake, because it actually could help you. It could benefit you. So here I'm just going to show off some quilts that I have made through the years. The one on the right here was from my mother-in-law, and this is one that initially, because lighthouses are just not my thing, and traditional colors and patterns are not my thing either, so I wasn't super excited to make this. Of course, I agreed to make it. It was from my mother-in-law. I ended up loving it. I like the way it looks, and I like the sort of subdued colors, and she was very pleased with it as well. Here is a Kokopele / Southwestern themed top. And these were two quilts I made for family members for Christmas. One is Avengers themed, and the other is a Disney themed quilt. And these are just sort of throw couch quilt size. Again, with the kitty helper, testing out the quilt, making sure it's suitable for humans. So thank you so much for joining me for this. I really hope that you found something useful and that you can take these tips and these tricks and apply them in your sewing and your quilting. We have a fantastic collection of crafting books here at the Morgan Library, but also through all of MCCPL. There's several librarians that are also quilters and sewers and crafters. So we have a fantastic collection. You can visit us online to place holds on your book. You can give us a call. We've got curbside pickup right now, even though we aren't currently open to the public. We may be soon. And if we're not, you can still get your resources. We also have some digital resources. Hoopla and EBSCO ebooks have digital copies of some crafting books. And you can give us a call or email us if you have any other questions. So thank you again for joining us, but there is one more thing. As I said earlier, mistakes are not a bad thing. I think they make you a better quilter. You make the mistake, you're not likely to make it again. And if you see it as a puzzle and something that you need to work out of, it's fine. Like, it helps you, I promise you. So, if you would like a prize, I want you to share with me in the comments below this video your biggest quilting mistake and how you dealt with it, if you learned from it, and just, to sort of share stories that hopefully will inspire others to not be afraid to make a mistake or to try something new. I'm going to put everybody's name that shares one of these into a hat to draw for a quilting prize. It's pretty good. But I'm going to share my story because I'm not asking you to share your story without sharing my story first. It was 2 years ago on Martin Luther King Day. The library was closed and I was actually working on some projects for Christmas. And I use a rotary blade and a ruler, and I have not really cut myself on it. My mom was very good teaching me early on how to use it and to use it safely. However, this day, I think I lost my focus for a moment, and the blade went up over the ruler and across the tip of my right pointer finger. I'm left-handed. And I cut off more than my finger than I had ever before. I immediately grabbed a towel and held my hand upright, but we'll just say there's a nice scar there. And since then I have used it's called a klutz glove. It's not chainmail, but it's essentially a tightly woven thread that protects your hand from the rotary blade. It actually can be used on the left or the right hand, so if you're right-handed, it works for you too, because it's got a pattern on it on either side to help you not slip. But yeah, I cut my finger off. I think I must be part reptile because it did thankfully grow back. But I have learned a lot from that. I have learned to always pay attention to what you're doing when you're cutting. And if you find yourself being a little careless with it, get a klutz glove and watch for that. Because I will not make that mistake again. In 30 years of sewing, I hadn't made that mistake before, and I thought I was immune. Well, I wasn't immune. So that's my story. I learned a lot from that, and I hope you will share with me your quilting mistakes and how you learned from them in the comments below. And thank you so much again for joining me today. And I hope to hear from you guys on Facebook, or you can call, see about any books we have, and potentially any crafting classes that we may be having in the future. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.